So without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Steve Ballmer. They'll let you here for 1 minute, one second.
Yeah.
Okay, go get him.
Well, thanks to Governor Ducey. He understated the amount that we have in common. Yes, I started my career at Procter & Gamble, but I'm also almost a native of Toledo, Ohio. I grew up in North Toledo. It's called Detroit, Michigan for some. And I, too, am an ice cream guy. The governor may have started Cold Stone Creamery, but I'm a good customer, and I love ice cream. I'm also a numbers guy. And I would say when I retired from Microsoft 3 years ago, one of the sources of, what shall I say, energy that I missed was kind of that numbers aspect. But shortly after I retired, my wife, who has been running our philanthropic activities for years, very focused in on child welfare issues, and now more broadly we're focused in on opportunities for children born in the U.S. Who may not have any other shot at the American dream. It's a real issue. But right after I retired, I couldn't get too focused on that. And she said, come on, let's get your brain engaged here on some of these issues of children. And I said, now come on. The government really does this. The government supports the old. The government supports the poor, children. Is there really a role for us other than paying our taxes? And she said, come on, dude, you can do better than that. And ultimately, I believe she was right, and that's why I'm very involved in our philanthropic activities. But it got me interested in government, if you will, by the numbers. I wanted to know, where do taxes come? Where do taxes go? How does the system work? What kind of outcomes does government really get for the dollars that go in? So I went to the internet and I started searching, and it's a nightmare. Try typing in something like government expenditures by function. Pretty reasonable query. You're going to get probably the top link, at least when I was doing this originally, comes from a blogger, an independent British guy, actually, top data about the US government, who happens to live in Seattle, Washington. And I said, come on, this can't be good enough. How do we do better? Well, as a former business person, I then said there must be something like the 10K report that all public companies are required to file with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Try typing in 10K for government. It turns out about a year later I found one. It is actually written by the Department of Treasury, but it's good, but it's not really all that you would want. So we started on this project, a group of us, to create a 10K for government. And oh, by the way, an annual report, which is easier to read than a 10K, and a website. And we said, what are the principles that we would ground in? First, only government data. 10K reports have to be the business's data. So we use 70 sources out of 120 government databases, 120 different government databases. Number two, you have to be factual and unbiased. No forecasts, no projections. I think that's very important. There are plenty of people who do forecasts, and I think that's where there's some sense of bias that comes into people's head, because nobody's quite sure what the basis is for forecasting. 10Ks have to be comprehensive. They have to talk about the whole business in a reasonable and responsible way. 10Ks have to provide context, historical and others. One of the things I think we find in a lot of political debate is people will snatch one number out of the air, and without context around the number, it's hard to know, is it big, is it small? If you say to the average citizen, $5 million, they'll say, whoa, huge number. If you say to the average governor $5 million, they'll say, well, yeah, important, but you know my budget is blah, blah, blah. And so I think it's important to provide that context. What would you want to talk about in a 10K for government? Businesses are kind of simple. They're about optimizing profit, and they have to build good products to get there. Government's actually about optimizing outcomes for citizens under certain financial constraints. So financials are not the optimization point, but particularly in state government, budgets do have to balance. Federal government gets a little trickier about that. As a business person, this is one bias I will admit to. I do think over time, budgets kind of have to balance. I don't understand anything else. But government is there to optimize outcomes for citizens. So in our 10K for government, we had to say, who are the citizens? Who is paying for the government and how? What is the government spending the money on? And then perhaps most importantly, what kind of outcomes are government getting? What are the missions of government and what are the outcomes? Well, to do that, you have to have some kind of comprehensible but comprehensive organizing structure for government. Businesses in their 10Ks have to break the business down into what are called segments. So if you're General Electric, well, let's say if you're Microsoft, you have a segment for Office software and for Windows software, and you have to explain the dynamics. We spent a lot of time thinking about how do you divide government into a set of manageable chunks. Very, very kind of difficult to do. I had a list of 50, and then I had a list of 14, and gosh, I thought I was doing great in trying to make this stuff comprehensible. And then somebody came to us and said, look, one of the guys on the project, in a sense, the segments of government were given to us by the founders in the preamble to the Constitution. Government's mission is establishing justice and ensuring domestic tranquility, providing for the common defense, promoting the general welfare, and securing these blessings for us and to ourselves and our posterity. Those are the segments of government. And you can ask, how are we doing in each case? Now, in some senses, you might think these are too broad. So in each of these categories, we broke them down one step further. Crime and disaster, consumer and employee safeguards, child safety. That's what justice is about. It's about physical protection, commercial protection, and a special case of child protection, where, in a sense, you're protecting a child almost from its guardians. And so you can see these are the segments that we chose to focus in on and what I might call the lines of business underneath them. We did write a 10K. 10Ks are kind of dry and hard to read. Ours for the U.S., before I say U.S. government, our 10K is for government in aggregate in the U.S. We combined state, local, and federal. Why? If you look at the average road in the state of Washington, I can't tell you who paid for it. Partly paid for the state, partly paid by the feds. If you visit schools in the state of Washington, partly paid locally, partly paid by the state, partly paid by the federal government, Title I dollars, et cetera. So if you're going to look at outcomes, you want to look at the combined spend against the outcome. And we did that in our 10K, in our more simplified annual report, as well as on our website. Maybe I'll give you just the briefest kind of view of what our website looks like. We'll go from our homepage to some of the big reports and give you just a sense. So here's our homepage. Click and we're into the big picture. First, revenues in blue. You can take a look at where the money comes from, even down to who pays for it. Here's corporate income taxes, how much state, how much local. You fan over to expenses, and you see those segments. Promote the general welfare, secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and posterity. Certain education, investment in human capital, is about securing the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. You can see total spend is $785 billion. It's split state and local. But we want to know more about this part of government. We give you breakouts, more on the spending, but the most interesting thing is what kind of outcomes do we get? You know, what are public school teacher salary, charter schools, overall school enrollment, dropout rates? I understand that there was just for the first time a standardization of the definition of dropout rates across states. These kinds of things are very important. The list goes on. We'll show you what the average reading proficiency is for kids in schools, SAT scores, and a variety of other things. That's kind of the framework of what we do. We launched, we've had 750,000 visitors from literally every state and all but 4 countries in the world: South Sudan, North Korea, Benin. We're missing one other. So there's a global interest in this kind of thing, even though our data is only focused in on the United States. But the interest has dropped off, frankly, from our initial launch. We get about 4,000 visitors a day. Some of that probably has to do with us needing to make this website easier, more navigable, more relevant day to day. Some of it probably has to do with marketing. It's kind of crazy to me that you market a public service, but darn it, we'll do some marketing, some search engine optimization. That's part of the problem with government websites, by the way, in general. They're very hard to find, even if they're in good shape when you get there. But the other problem, I think, is to really suss out and understand what citizens want in terms of the facts. And so we ran a poll recently with Harris, the Harris poll people, and asked a bunch of questions about what citizens are interested when it comes to the facts. 88% of citizens said, and I was heartened by most of this, 88% of citizens say they prefer facts to anecdotes. And yet a lot of what we read in the paper and hear is anecdotes. I think anecdotes are great ways to get color and texture, but need to be anchored in real numbers. And I'm not an atypical citizen. 3 out of 4 people think most of the information they receive about government finances are biased. The number one, by the way, search query on our site is expenditures. People want to know what the money's going to. This was interesting. 77% of people in the United States, this was across Democrats and Republicans, urban and rural. You know, we had people from all states participate. 77% of people say civic education in the country is poor. It got us even more interested in seeing if we can work with educators to take the kind of stuff we've created and let them create even civics classes for the 11th grade level, where most kids get this in school. This one was particularly disheartening. Only 38% of people agreed with the idea that people generally agree on the facts, even if they have different beliefs. The general notion is people who don't agree basically aren't looking at the same underlying data. People will say that they will change their beliefs in evidence of information. You remember, this poll's rich, poor, high school graduates, non-high school graduates, 80%. 88% of people say we need to use the same data to have an informed debate about what goes in the country. You know, what I found when I was at Microsoft was quite remarkable. I spent a lot of time actually getting data common and consistent for decision making. We'd get in meetings, though, and people would still say, we can't do this to our customers. And somebody else would say, we must do this. We have to really invest in this. And somebody else would say, no, we can't afford it. And when you got down to it, one guy was recommending an investment of $22 million, and the other person was recommending an investment of $25 million. The amount of shouting before people stood and looked at the same facts. In the old days of Microsoft, we used to have multiple accounting systems, and we couldn't even get people to agree how many copies of Microsoft Word we had sold. Getting these things to be consistent and understandable helps bring people to common ground. The guy who had to take care of the customer and the woman who, had more interest in preserving finances, they may never have changed their beliefs, but they could reach more reasonable compromises than they would have otherwise. You'll be somewhat excited to know that while the numbers are small, local and state data is more trusted than federal data. I'm not sure you're going to be proud of 54%, but it's better than 53%, but it's better than 44%. And for the elected officials in the room, 78% of Americans believe that if they thought politicians were relying on government data, it would improve their trust in elected officials. And it is important that the data be government data. I don't understand how any organization thinks it's going to operate by using other people's information. It should be about using their own information. Governor Ducey and I were talking about this a little bit backstage. He used to be state treasurer in Arizona. And I asked, do you have like a computer where you can just go and pull up these kinds of statistics? Well, it sounded like the financial data is easier to find than it might be outcome data on education, prisons. I was shocked, actually, by some of the things you learn in this process. The average sentence for a first-time violent offender, the average time served for a first-time violent offender, rape, murder, armed assault, etc., is only about 50 months. That kind of blew my mind, about 4 years for those offenses. But that kind of stuff would be important data to have. Different people might disagree about what's right and wrong, but it would be important data to have in these kinds of discussions. The next frontier for us is now actually to move to the state level. We have a lot of things we still want to do at the national level. But what would a 10K for government and an annual report and a website look like for the state of California, the state of Colorado, the state of North Dakota, the state of South Dakota? What would that look like? And it's important because you still want to add state, federal, and local dollars together, but see the overall impact in a state or in a school district or in a county. What is the money translating to in terms of outcomes? There's a good infrastructure across states in something that I've learned to call the CAFR, these financial reports produced at the state level. There's a problem, though. They don't focus as much on outcomes as they do on expenditures. And second, they don't match up with what the states report to the Census Bureau, which is the source of data we've already used. There's something not quite right in the way this works, but we will at least delve into and investigate those challenges. This is just a small example we threw together at some of our early work. We said, how does taxable income and taxpayers flow between states? If you are yellow on this chart or dark yellow, tax filers, we get this data from the IRS, tax filers are moving out of your state. If you are blue, tax filers are moving into your state. Not only are tax filers moving in your state, but adjustable gross income is moving into your state. So in Rhode Island, there was a net outflow of tax filers and tax revenue before about the year 2000. There was a net of inflow. I don't know what happened here in Rhode Island over time, but there was a net of inflow, and now there's been a net outflow again. I'll pick a second state here, Texas. Texas has been the state in which there has been the most inflow. By the time we're done, we'll be able to tell you how much is that people 65 plus versus people who are younger. That kind of data, not about just the average, but on specific citizens, we think is important. Texas has been a boom, people moving in the whole time. I'll show you just one more to give you a sense. Here's Louisiana. There was a trickle of people and money moving out of the state. What do you think happened with the spike? That's Katrina. Then there's a surge as some people move back into the state, and now it's leveled off again at a pretty flat level. I've looked at a few of the states. They all have some interesting story. You can sometimes see where tax rates went up or down. They actually show in the government data that you can look at. So as we go forward, a number of things. We have to keep this data up to speed. I'm committed on this project. It wasn't just a one-time, oh, that was fun, blah, blah, blah. We think it's an important effort that we are committed to for the long run. Since I'm a tech guy, I got to tell you that we have to fix and enhance our tech platform. That'll be important, particularly for making it easier and easier for people to access this data. My great dream someday is you can just type into the search engine, show me expenditures on education in the state of Oklahoma, and the data comes right back to you instead of sending you even to a set of tables to go look. I talked about civic education. One of the things I think is really important is that there be more data collection and usage. Particularly as we look at state data, I think it would be great if there was some level of standardization in how people take a look at these things. I've been learning about the Center for Best Practices as part of the National Governors Association. It sounds like a very interesting organization that receives private funding. Believe me, we'll dig into these things. When you look at what our visitors are interested in, you can see a set of things they're interested in at the national level. At the local level, I suppose we won't surprise any of you. Housing and homelessness is the top thing that people are looking for information on. Education, infrastructure, roads, bridges, etc. Jobs and wages. This one surprised me because I would have thought people would associate this issue at the national level, but people are actually interested at the local level in this topic. Family composition surprised me as well. People want to know what percentage of single mothers do we have, how aged is our population, etc. We'll try to build this out. We're going to take one state to start. Haven't decided which one yet, but we'll take one state to start using just publicly available data. We'll build the 10K. This is tough stuff, actually. We have some interns from Stanford working for us this summer. They're eager beavers, young people, dive in. You know, we have them up in the state of Washington. I said, let's get on this. And one of them in our first kind of check-in says, well, it's a really exciting project, but there's some data I had to go to the state capitol in Olympia to get. I said, what do you mean you had to go to the state capitol in Olympia? They said, well, the data's public, but you actually have to go in the building to get it for privacy purposes. I said, how can it enhance privacy that you have to walk into the building? I don't know. I think there's some work to do even at the state level to continue to improve the accessibility and value of data. I appreciate your time today. We're very interested, as we like to say in our nation, in numbers, broadening out to the state level. I think the notion of informed debate through facts is one of the things that, frankly, will do the most to help curb the rancorous discussions that we hear today in politics. I think particularly at the state level, governors have to be more practical, more action-oriented. It really is an executive function, and the notion of really having the same kinds of tools you have to instrument and understand how to operate your business, I think every state governor, legislator deserves. Thank you very much. usafacts.org or follow us on Twitter. Thank you.